So I just want to do a quick follow-up to the last video I did, which was a foreign policy analysis of what's going on in Israel right now and their relationship with Iran. And I was going to leave it at that. I I wanted to move on to some other stuff, some other topics, and I was sort of poking around. Again, I haven't been involved with conservative talk radio for a little while, or political talk radio in general, obviously. And I stumbled across, this Ben Shapiro report just came out. I think it was today or maybe yesterday. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This is so bizarre that it's gone this far with Ben Shapiro that he proves really two things here. The first thing that he proves is that he never studied foreign policy. And the second thing that he proves is that he's never been in a fight in his entire life. He does not know how anything works. And this has always been my problem with people like almost all of the commentators at the Daily Wire. I'm trying to think if there is somebody out there right now who I believe has lived enough life to be somebody worth following, worth listening to. I don't think there is. Not off the top of my head, where there's just, they live in this bubble of education and background, and they haven't really seen the world. They don't know how it works. They haven't studied it. They haven't tried. And part of that really isn't their fault. It should be said before we get into this. There are too many externalities in our lives right now that have made us all very isolated. And we can feel that. A lot of people are talking about how they feel very isolated in the world right now, and they don't know what's going on, and they're so confused, and I'm not surprised by that at all. The simple fact is that most of us are just trying to survive. We are overloaded with stuff when we are in school during especially in public school, just overloaded with things that burden us to death. We can't even get a good night's sleep while we're in school. It is a complete nightmare. I want to do a video on that later on, but then you come out of school and it's either get a job, go to trade school, go to college, God forbid at this point. The simple fact is we are just overloaded, and we can never really get the overhead view that these people keep trying to claim that they have. But that doesn't stop them from giving their opinion, does it? So let's just get into this. I don't know what he's asking for at this point, but let's try to figure it out together.
Then it turns out that the party that is deterred is not, in fact, the opponents, the enemies of the United States. The party that is deterred is the United States herself. Now, it is one thing to suggest that the United States should be deterred from forward action by the presence of, say, the Soviet Union. But to suggest that the United States should be deterred from providing full aid to Ukraine, for example, such that Ukraine is not overrun, and that we should be deterred by the possibility that Vladimir Putin is going to unleash nuclear weapons, which, of course, is not a credible threat when it comes to simply maintaining the current battle lines in Ukraine. That's stupid.
Why? I mean, this is... I want you to remember this, because he's going to come back to nukes with Iran in a minute, and he's going to have a very different take about what's going on there. So let's just keep this in mind, shall we?
When the suggestion is that the United States should be deterred by Iran, and that's what's happening right now. Iran is saying, we fired 300-odd missiles, drones at Israel. Most of those got knocked down. Virtually all of them got knocked down. But don't go further, or we are going to go further. And Iran is openly saying that right now. Iran is saying if Israel were to counterattack, then they would unleash 1,500 cruise missiles, for example, and ballistic missiles. And the United States is then putting pressure on Israel. The United States is the deterred party.
So he goes on for a little while. I just wanted to also add, just while I was thinking about it, isn't it amazing how... So it turns out, first of all, that Ben Shapiro is 100% in on the Ukraine war as well, which I did not know. This is bizarre. Don't you remember and love that time when conservatives were fiscally conservative, where they were actually worried about how much money we were spending and how we were in a death spiral of spending and taxes? Don't you remember that? I remember that. Those were good times. Those were good times.
Being deterred is a sign that you are the weaker party in any conflict, because of course the stronger party typically is not deterred. Typically, again, it is the weaker party who is worried that the cost of action will outweigh the perceived benefit. Typically, if you're on the playground, it is not the bully who is being deterred by the weakling, it's the weakling who's being deterred.
So what he's arguing for here, to be clear, is that when you are a stronger, larger country, and you tell another country that is smaller than you and weaker than you that it is not supposed to do something, or that you don't like something that it's doing, that the reaction to them doing it anyway is invasion. I just want you to sit with that for a second. Wow, it's like it's 2003 all over again. One of the things that I love about a lot of conservatives is that they have finally started to figure out, like myself, that the Iraq War was a complete sham, that it was a pyramid scheme in which certain parties in America became outrageously wealthy while we sent American farm boys to die in the desert. It's crazy. It's crazy that we were for that. And a lot of it just happened to be that we were lied to. I don't want to get into this right now, but in my personal opinion, it was also due to the fact that the left's arguments against the Iraq War were so bad. They were so weak. And a lot of that had to do with the Bush derangement syndrome that was going on at the time. You have to remember that, I couldn't have a single decent argument with anybody about that stuff, or at least not based on the facts. Eventually, it just turned into like, haha, not my president. He choked on a pretzel. You know what I mean?
By the bully. When it comes to foreign policy, the United States has the world's largest and most powerful military presence, spanning the globe in terms of technology far more advanced than anything on the table, by a factor of probably 5. And yet it is the United States that is over and over being deterred by significantly smaller powers, which of course is why smaller powers are feeling their oats right now. So the question is why? Why exactly has it become sort of rote, point of course, for other smaller parties to deter the United States? The answer obviously is not insufficiency of American materiel. The answer...
I can't even remember what he says here, so we'll get to that in a second. I'll tell you why. Let's see. We were in a 20-year war in the desert, and we spent a massive amount of money on it, and nobody wants to get involved in that. And surprise, surprise, almost to the second that Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan, which, again, to be fair, it was the wrong way to do it. A lot of people died unnecessarily. It was weird. It was weird that we suddenly pulled out. I think it caught the military-industrial complex by surprise. And all of a sudden, here shuffles in a new war. How weird, how strange. It's almost like this was all based on the fact that profits were down in certain very powerful corporations. Very strange. Yeah, weird. We don't look. We do have the world's greatest military. That is true. We could take over lots of places, Ben. We could take over Canada, and we could take over Mexico, and all of South America. How about Central America too, for that matter? Let's take back the Panama Canal. Let's start making some money. Let's become an empire. I mean, like, what the hell are you talking about? What are you talking about here? So this is the guy who claims to support the world's most moral military, Israel, huh? Okay, all right. Let's see what he has to say.
Obviously is not insufficiency of America's military might. America is so far beyond, for example, the Chinese military in terms of advancement, that the idea that China would go to full-scale war with the United States, that'd be the biggest mistake China ever made. And if that's true of China, which has nuclear weapons, think about Iran, which does not have nuclear weapons, and whose ballistic missile system is so bad that half of the rockets it just fired at Israel fell in its own territory or the territory of other countries before they even hit Israeli airspace. So why is America being deterred? And
when it comes to our coming war with China, as a lot of conservatives keep screaming about, the real question there is, what would that even look like? Because, I mean, I guess if you got us over to China and we crossed the Pacific already and we were set up with tanks and missile sites and in China on mainland, yeah, maybe. They have they have quite a few people. I don't know if we even have enough bullets to kill everybody in China. I don't know what he's talking about. The real problem with warfare is always the supply chain. So what? You mean if China came over here to attack us? Yeah, they would be put down immediately. If we went over there to attack them, I think the same thing would happen to us, really. The aircraft carriers are just giant targets in the ocean for missiles. That's really all they are, in the grand scheme of things. At least that was the idea that the U.S. military had back when I was studying the stuff in, 2000. God, I guess that was like 2017, 2018-ish. That was the simple fact was that the American military was saying, hey, we don't mind actually that China is making all these aircraft carriers because we could sink them all. they're just big targets and we can watch them and see where they go. So I don't know what he just doesn't know what he's talking about here, and he just kind of. Anyway, well, he'll get to his point pretty soon, I think. Hold on.
The answer is simple moral cowardice. The United States under Joe Biden has become a morally cowardly force. The United States under Joe Biden has basically decided that any engagement in the world sphere is some sort of act of aggression. And even so much as funding our allies so those allies can defend themselves with forward action to deter, for example, Iran from doing this again. That would be some sort of American aggression. That would escalate things. The reality is that when it comes to the Middle East...
Before he gets to this point, so just to debrief here, what he's saying is, aren't you a real man, Joe Biden? A real man would have punched her. I don't even... do what to Iran? What's the limit? What is he asking for? He never gets to that, by the way. And it's on purpose because dumb conservatives who are just listening to this while they blow leaves around the lawn are not going to ask those questions. They're just not going to ask those questions. And they're just going to keep subscribing to the Daily Wire like morons.
Every single conflict is a game of chicken. The game of chicken, as we all know, is a game wherein two sides both drive toward a cliff, and whoever stops closest to the cliff without driving over wins the game of chicken. The worst case scenario is you're the one who goes off the cliff. But when it comes to the United States versus other countries, we have both the best gas and the best brakes. The reality is that if there were to be a cliff, and if we were to hit that cliff, the significant impact would be on Iran and not on the United States. The United States is already engaged in wartime activity against Iran. It was American forces striking down drones directly from Iranian territory. And yet, again, it is Joe Biden who is acting the weakling, not just with regard to Iran directly, but with regard to Hezbollah, with regard to Hamas, which is a basically defunct terror group at this point.
So he kind of look at that face. Look at that face as he as he sort of realizes what he just said here. First of all, he brings up Hezbollah. Hezbollah is an interesting group to bring up, and it's a sticking point for Israel, but it's not a particularly interesting group to us as Americans. Hezbollah, it should be said, is more of a broker than a terrorist group at this point. They do a lot of money laundering, and they do it. They're mainly out of Canada, South America, and the Middle East. They do a lot of business with China. I mean, they do, from what I understand, they do a lot of business with the CIA too. So it's effectively, Hezbollah has made itself very important to a lot of intelligence agencies. So it's interesting that Israel kind of keeps bringing up Hezbollah at the same time that it brings up Hamas as somebody that it needs to destroy. It's not the same thing. But what he's just said here is that Hamas is gone. Hamas has basically disappeared from the face of the planet. And if that's the case, what the hell are we still doing in Gaza, guys? So this is something that I don't think I brought up yet. I brought this up a little bit with the Dennis Prager debate that I did, I think it was a couple of days ago. There is currently no sitting government in Israel. So, or sorry, in Gaza. So what Israel needs to do is it needs to set one up. You know, if you are the conqueror of a place, it is in fact, unless you really are just genocidal, it is in fact your job at a certain point to set up a government after you have destroyed your enemies, right? So in a normal situation that wasn't genocidal, what Israel would do is they go, okay, we have destroyed half of Gaza. We're going to stop killing you now. Now comes the aid. We've destroyed Hamas. Hamas is gone. There's no more reason for us to do this to you. This is your new governor. This is Governor Herschel, and he is going to make sure that you guys get what you need from us. He is going to be your liaison. These are his lieutenants. These are the guys who are going to be dealing with stuff. We're going to get you water. We're going to get you food. We're going to get you aqueducts, just like the Romans. We're going to give you stuff. We're going to give you technology. We're going to give you things you never had. And now we're going to be friends. Get it? Understand what's happening? Nobody's going to be mad at us. Do you understand? That's what used to happen. That's what used to happen. And that's how you effectively changed the geopolitical situation you are in. Israel doesn't seem to have any interest in that. None. Zero. And Ben Shapiro is going to prove that right now as an agent of Israel, effectively. Whether he's working with them actively or not, he is going to prove that today.
The only reason that is happening is because Joe Biden does not have the courage of American convictions. This is not an argument for America to be involved in war. This is an argument that American deterrence relies on credible threat of force. And that in a world where America's deterrence is gone, everybody gets a lot more aggressive. The world becomes a lot more violent. There's this theory out there from both the sort of far libertarian right and from the far left Noam Chomsky crew.
Okay, so what he's saying now is that what he's doing is not making an argument for more war. The connotation of that is that what he's actually arguing for is massacre, right? If we're not doing a full-on invasion, what we're going to do is what? A missile strike? We're just going to start sending drones overhead? We're going to use the Obama method and just start using missiles from the sky to terrorize our enemies? Sounds like terrorism to me, yes? It's just terrorism from the perspective of a stronger person, right? Because usually terrorism is done from a weaker party. But if it's coming from America, what? It's okay now? Come on, okay.
That the way that world wars start is through a series of escalating steps that no one can stop. The other way, there are two ways that world wars start. That can be one of them when you have a relative balance of power. But when you have one full-on dominant power, the way the world war starts is by simply mistaking your way into it by failure of credibility. The reality is that the United States owes it to the West to be an iron wall and to provide enough support to its allies that those allies can be an iron wall against forces of, say, Iran. And yet that is not what the Biden administration is pursuing, and that is a moral shortcoming. That is a question of will, and it is a question of common sense. So the Biden administration continues to put pressure on Israel not to actually take any sort of aggressive action against Iran, believing that this will lead to some sort of escalation. Now, it seems to me that when you fire, again, 300 drones and missiles at a sovereign state, that is the escalation. And the big problem for Israel is if they don't do anything with regard to Iran going forward, well, then Iran is going to feel like...
So this is where he really starts to confuse himself, or maybe he's not. Maybe he's not confused at all, right? Maybe this is all very much on purpose. So, first of all, the escalation did not start with Iran. It started with Israel when you, unprovoked, attacked one of their embassies in Syria to get at somebody who was a Hamas leader, supposedly. That's what this was. Israel attacks first. Now, of course, Ben Shapiro would say, no. The attack started on October 7th. Fine. But what does this have to do with Iran? Israel has always claimed that Iran has been this sort of financier of terrorism abroad, and particularly at Israel. That may or may not be true. I've never actually seen evidence for it. People keep saying it. It's something that people keep saying, particularly Israelis. And I don't know that it's actually true. Now, of course, it would, in fairness, be somewhat difficult to prove because, it probably is all in cash, and it probably is, a situation where intelligence agencies would actually have to open up and say, okay, well, here's what we have. Here are the convoys coming into Iran. They're leaving Iran. They've got trucks full of money. This is, we actually watch the money change hands and all of that. Fine. But, go ahead and let us know. Tell us, show us those things. I'm not saying it's impossible. It's probably, let's say that's right. Let's say that it's true. If we're going to start talking about how countries are responsible for attacks overseas because they have in some way financed them, boy, oh boy, do we have a lot of blood on our hands as Americans, yes? Are those people, should they be allowed to just target us and us not do anything back to them? I don't, when does this stop? How far back do you want to go?
They got away with something. Yes, they failed this time militarily. But what happens when they have a nuclear weapon? Right now, the United States is being deterred in Ukraine by a nuclear Russia. If you're Iran, aren't you moving forward as fast as possible with a nuclear weapon? Because that way, if the United States starts attempting to strike down cruise missiles on the way to Israel next time, Iran will say, well, we have nukes, and we will use those on you. We will use those on your friends.
Wow. So let's go back to that beginning part where he was talking about how Russia is full of crap that they would ever use a nuke in Ukraine. Which, by the way, I don't believe for a second. Nuke means a lot of different things. Just because, we think of it as like Hiroshima, but there are smaller nukes and bigger nukes than that. There are frightening bombs out there that take out American states worth of land, that just glass them at this point. We have a very frightening level of deterrence happening, as it would be called by governments. So he starts out saying that Russia would never use nukes against America. And the reason is because America is so powerful, I think was sort of the implication. I don't think he said that outright, but the implication was that Russia would never attack Ukraine with nukes because it just doesn't make any sense. Now, for some reason, Iran, a state that Ben Shapiro himself has noted, does not have nukes yet. It doesn't have nukes yet. Could use it in the future because, after all, we didn't stop a drone attack that happened where they sent over a few hundred drones and the Iron Dome took them all out to the tune of what, 99%? I think the damage report said that it was something like 1% of the drones actually did any kind of damage. Okay, so let's keep going.
In other words, you deter and you hamstring your enemies now before they become more powerful, because otherwise they are simply going to continue to flex their muscles and push the envelope.
We see again the old deterrence from Iraq. We got to fight them there so that we don't have to fight them here. Isn't it amazing? Isn't it incredible that these people just absolutely refuse to learn? Of course, again, once again, it has to be said that this guy is very probably just an Israeli agent, right? So he's got a certain line that he's got to spew. But my God, the comments on this video are just so damn terrifying because so few people watching this kind of stuff are calling them on it, and they don't care. I mean, as much as I'd like to say that this is sort of a leftoid problem, this is a conservative problem as well. People are not learning. They're not learning, and they're not adapting. And it's a huge problem. It's going to just keep getting us in trouble, and it's disgusting. It's actually morally disgusting that people on the right and the left cannot learn lessons. How many times are we going to do this to ourselves? We're out of money. We're out of money for this. It's over. What the hell are we talking about?
And yet again, the Biden administration is seeking de-escalation. There's only one reason that they are seeking de-escalation. Because again, you know how this de-escalates? Iran getting punched in the teeth. That's how this gets de-escalated. The way that this de-escalates is Israel takes Hamas off the board as a power player. Then Israel signs a peace agreement with the Saudis. And now you have a Sunni...
Okay, wait a minute, because before we get to this is crazy. So we have to do this piece one at a time. What he's explaining now is that de-escalation happens when you escalate. I want to do a video at some point on the police departments in America, because there's a certain kind of, I hate to say this word, but there is a certain kind of toxic masculinity by people who are throwing their weight around in a situation that does not need it. And there is a complete lack of understanding about what de-escalation is. If you watch a lot of cops escalate a situation on, if you just go to YouTube, there's a great channel on this. I actually watch it all the time. It's called Lackluster. And what you'll notice about it is that every time that a police officer escalates a situation needlessly, they think they are de-escalating. And what their mindset is, if I don't show my power, if I don't use extra force, this only gets worse. I'm going to cut it off at the root. And the root of the problem is that this person does not understand that they don't have power here. I'm going to show them. I'm going to show them how weak they really are. And I'm going to do that by hurting them as much and as fast as possible for compliance purposes. And of course, what that does is it escalates the situation needlessly. It absolutely it does every time. And we seem to be doing it more and more and more policy-wise, and we seem to be wanting it more. Our talking heads keep asking for it. It's so bizarre. It's so strange. We don't like it when we see it from the police, and people will go out into the streets and burn everything down, and ask for the complete destruction of the police force. And simultaneously, we will ask for it more on the world stage, as if that is not even worse in a lot of ways. We're talking about nuclear warheads here. Okay, so let me see if I can go back just a couple seconds here. Okay, this is Ben Shapiro's game plan.
Israel takes Hamas off the board as a power player. Then Israel signs a peace agreement with the Saudis. And now you have a Sunni Israeli axis that is oriented against Iran. Then that axis eventually takes out Hezbollah. And now Iran is completely surrounded and completely isolated. And that axis is also capable of taking out Iran's nuclear facilities, such that Iran can no longer pose a nuclear threat. That is the way that you de-escalate the situation. You don't de-escalate the situation by telling Iran, well, sure, you attacked a sovereign state with a massive cachet of arms from your own...
Okay, so he goes on for a little while more with that stuff, but I think his first step was something along the lines of Israel and Saudi Arabia becoming friendly with each other to balance against Iran. There is nothing stopping Israel from doing that now. Nothing. There is no reason for them to not be friendly with Saudi Arabia if they aren't already. In fact, this shocked me that he even said this, because my understanding was that Israel had a very good relationship with Saudi Arabia. The simple fact is that Israel wants the Arab world destabilized. And in order to do that, what you do is you balance countries against each other, and you got to pick a side to do that. Officially speaking, I mean. And then behind the scenes, what you do is you fuel both sides. So, for example, it has been true in the past that it turned out that Israelis were selling weapons to Iran. Why would they do that? Well, because as long as you're selling weapons to both sides, you're escalating the situation in such a way that the Arab world destabilizes itself. That's the hope, right? Because it's, again, for Israelis, this is Israeli versus Arab. They really don't want to be friends with anybody in the Muslim world. That's what it comes down to. And again, there's nothing stopping them from being friends with Saudi Arabia now. There's nothing stopping them really from being more friendly with the countries around them. I've been saying for a long, long time, I don't know why they don't reach out to these countries to help them with problems that they have. For example, wouldn't it be nice if Israel started building desalination plants and then shipping water to Syria and saying, here you go, we want to be friends with all of our neighbors. You're welcome. Here's more water. They could do the same to Lebanon. They could help Jordan a lot. They are friendly with Jordan in a way that they're not friendly with the other nations around them. But there's nothing stopping Israel from being friends with people. It seems like they are just maniacally attacking everybody around them for no reason, for no real reason. So here's a guy who's explaining to us, the peons, how to de-escalate a situation, and he himself and his friend Israel cannot understand that what you've been doing this entire time is escalating and escalating and escalating. He then brings up Hezbollah again. Well, it's weird. He even brings it up before Hamas, which is strange because you think that, that'd be a priority right now. But of course, it's not a priority to him. Hamas has been disbanded. It's destroyed. There's nothing left of Hamas. Now, is that true? Well, in the long run, probably not. Because when you keep killing people like this and you keep blasting bombs, I mean, look, think about it from your perspective. If you were living in Gaza and you weren't Hamas, and you're in a refugee camp, and a country that you've never dealt with, that is neighboring to you, that has kept you penned in, and has put you in a bad situation your entire life, murders your whole family with a bomb, and you survive somehow, what would you do afterwards? So then the obvious question is, again, why go after Hezbollah? Because it just never ends with them. There's no limitation to these goals. This has always been the problem. Mission creep has always been a problem for the West, and it never stops. There's no goalpost where they go, okay, mission accomplished, we're out of here, thanks a lot, everybody. Oh, no. Now we're not just going after Hamas in Gaza. We got to go after Hezbollah now. And Hezbollah, of course, is everywhere else. They are an international community, and all this does is give them a carte blanche to just go after people everywhere because October 7th happened. This has been it's really frightening how much like 9/11 this is, and how it's almost like a playbook now for these Western countries. Let's see if there's anything left. I don't think there is, but we may cut it off here.
Sovereign territory. But, we'll call this one just, this one doesn't count. Oh, no biggie. No biggie. As former State Department spokesperson Vali Nasser said, Iran has actually achieved deterrence against both Israel and the United States because of the U.S.'s cowardice.
Well, it did create a dilemma for Iran. Iran could not just roll over and be seen by its own population and in the region to essentially taking such a provocative escalation from Israel without responding. On the other hand, they did not want to throw Prime Minister Netanyahu a lifeline of basically shifting the attention from Gaza to Iran and Syria, and even drawing the United States into a war with Iran. So they had to react, but they had to react in a way where the emphasis was not really on retaliation, but on deterrence. And I think the deterrence was achieved not just by the military act they carried out yesterday.
Right. So this is kind of an interesting point that this guy is making. He's actually made a couple interesting points so far. The first one is that this is exactly what Israel wants, in a sense, and Iran knows it, because Israel would want nothing more than for everybody to look in another direction while it massacres Gaza. And if America gets into war with Iran, that's our new focus now. And it's free to do whatever it wants to Gaza, and presumably, because they keep talking about Hezbollah and terrorists elsewhere, presumably this is going to be done to the West Bank as well. I mean, that it seems like they're trying to really just annihilate the Palestinian question, right? The second point that this guy makes that's really interesting is that if you think about it, Iran is also a country that exists in the world, and it has its own prerogative, an own point of view. And if anything, it needs to be able to deter Israel. Because, again, Israel struck first. It threw the first punch. So every single thing that Ben Shapiro just said actually applies to Iran. They have to be able to say, no. You do that again, and we really will do something serious. So in other words, Ben Shapiro is making the exact arguments that everyone should be making for Iran.
But essentially by the very effective psychological campaign that they managed through this escalation, both in Israel and also in Western capitals.
So the real question is, why is the West being intimidated by a third-rate power like Iran? Why is that happening? And the answer, of course, is because Joe Biden is beholden to his left-wing base and he is scared of them. This is why John Kirby, national security spokesperson yesterday, suggested that it is in the...
See, what's interesting about that point is that the Joe Biden administration hasn't really gave one damn about what its base thinks about us being in Ukraine or Russia or what, I mean, if it really was scared, by the way, of its base, it would have stopped the Gaza massacres a long time ago, wouldn't it? Isn't that what everyone's calling for? Wouldn't it actually have actively stopped you in Israel? It just... None of this makes any sense, man. It just nobody can hear this. Nobody can hear, like they just soak it in like sponges and just do nothing.
Chief interest of the United States to stop Israel from taking the sort of action that would stop Iran from taking future action. That de-escalation is top of the priority list.
Again, that's a decision that only Prime Minister Netanyahu and the War Cabinet can make. I mean, again, we respect their sovereign decision-making process. What we want to see is de-escalation of the tensions. We don't want to see a wider war. And everything the president's been doing, including putting U.S. forces in the fight Saturday night to defend Israel, which I think is the first time it's ever been done, has been to de-escalate, to take the tensions down, to put resources in the region, to send a strong signal to anybody who might act inimical to our interest or the interest of our allies and partners, that it's unacceptable.
Okay, but it's not de-escalating if you're wearing a bulletproof vest and someone fires a gun at you and it happens to hit the bulletproof vest. The de-escalation comes when you then clock that person directly in the face and take their gun away from them. Now the situation is de-escalated.
So this is a very interesting point in the sense that, again, we've already discussed the fact that Israel struck first. So this would be more like Israel punches Iran in the face, and then Iran says, all right, face me fully. I'm going to hurt you, but I'm not going to kill you, and then shoots it with the bulletproof vest. That's really what happened. For Ben Shapiro, de-escalation does not happen until you are standing over a humiliated and bloody enemy. That's not the definition of de-escalation. That's not what this is. That's something very different. That's something that looks more like total war. a very neoliberal idea, by the way. So again, this whole thing is mask off for him, and I keep saying this, but it's true. I wish people could hear this stuff and really understand what's being said, and they're just soaking it in like fools, and there's no critical thinking. And I hate that term because it used to be used a lot against me by liberal teachers, actually, especially in high school and middle school. I used to make a lot of conservative arguments, and I was known as kind of like the conservative guy, and a sort of bludgeon that a lot of these leftist teachers would use against me is to say, I really wish you'd use your critical thinking, which was a way of saying, you're an idiot, but I don't want to really argue against you. This really is, though, a problem of critical thinking. I don't know who these people are, but there's an intellectual laziness here that is so frightening.
It is not, in fact, a victory or a de-escalation simply to survive an attack from Iran. Iran presumably will change its MO going forward. That is the idea here. And yet the Biden administration continues to push forward with restrictions, not on Iran. They're not pushing sanctions on Iran. They're not pushing significant ramifications for Iran after all of this. Instead, they're putting all sorts of pressure on Israel not to do anything. It's more on this in just one moment.
My God, the commercials are just so out of control. I think we're going to stop here. That's enough. The simple fact is that Israel is not interested in making friends in the Middle East and with the Arab nations. And I don't know why. There's no real reason for them not to. If they really wanted to turn things around, they would. That's all. And instead, they are maniacs. They are maniacs who are murdering people indiscriminately, and they're doing it with our money.